All right.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Games and Writers. I'm your host, Craig Eggehart, and today we have M.L. Williams as our guest. Williams is an award-winning ex-journalist who retired after 39 years of battling deadlines to venture to the world of science fiction. The recipient of 4 National News Writing Awards and several state and regional honors, Williams lives in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and spends his time reading, writing, and enjoying his role as Grandpa. M.L. Williams, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Craig.
So take us through your writing journey just a little bit. When did you first start thinking about writing? Like, say, writing beyond just, oh, I don't know, writing, I will not dip Susie's pigtail in the inkwell 50 times on the blackboard or something like that.
Probably I started writing little essays and fun stories probably in, I would say, junior high. Some very English teachers that were, one was a nationally known poet, and others were very good about encouraging inspiration and imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And so probably started there. And then, as I went through high school, took a hard look at what I wanted to do. And it seemed like journalism was a good step with fiction in the back of my mind, but I knew we had to make a profession out of it and to make a living.
Right.
I probably had to do something other than just try my hand at fiction. It took me a while to get my brain around that. I might be able to write fiction, and journalism kind of gave me the basics.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to start off.
Being able to spin tales.
Yeah, it's tough to start off with fiction,
yes, exactly.
because
exactly.
that's actually a question I was going to ask you in a little bit, but you brought it up, so we can just go straight to it. With journalism, was that purely something you did to pay the bills? Was it something that you really always wanted to do?
A little bit of both. Once I got into it, I've got my freshman and sophomore years in college. I was at a community college. And again, I had some very good professors and teachers that were very encouraging with my writing. But they were still basically pushing the journalism end of it. And basically, again, you had to do something to have a career, to make, you have to pay the bills.
Right.
And I thought, well, maybe I can use this as a springboard, for writing later. But it took like 30 some years for me to actually get around to it after family and life happens. Yes.
Yep. I think
exactly.
that happens for a lot of people. They start out and they have there's all the idealistic dream of being a novelist or whatever, but then real life ends up getting in the way, and then you got to pay the bills, you get a family, you got to support your family, and and all that stuff. And I think that's where people with character do have their priorities straight, like you clearly did. But of course, that desire and that dream never really goes away, because if you're a writer, then you're a writer.
There was something always in the back of my mind that there was something more I could be doing, and I usually excelled. Excuse me, if I could be blunt with feature writing and this type of thing. That's in journalism. That's where I won a couple of the awards.
Okay.
Opinion writing, feature writing. One was for in-depth, this type of thing. But again, as I also started to read more for pleasure and be more aware of there are writers out there, especially locally, that's kind of sparked my interest again.
Yeah. So are you pretty involved with the local author scene over there?
I have been. Right now, there's the authors group that's going to be organizing an event in mid-September. Excuse me, I believe it's the first weekend in September at Cedar Rapids Library. It's called Imagine Other Worlds with Authors.
Mm-hmm.
It's acronym Iowa. Oh, you drop off that first W, I guess. Anyway, and I'm one of the people on the committee to kind of get things going. It had a good start the first 3 years. A couple of people people are just very much into the literary scene, as well as a couple authors kind of kickstarted it and then handed it off to some other folks last year.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you're in Iowa. How do you find? Rephrase the question, maybe. So there's this perception, and I'm in Iowa now too. So this is not my opinion, but there's a perception on the coasts, for example. Whether we're living in flyover country, and there's really nothing of note here. But it's been my experience that in Iowa and in a number of other Midwestern states, for example, that the literary scene in many cases is flourishing, and in most cases is certainly more in depth than I think the coastal elites might want to admit or might even have occurred to them. And how do you find it? Do you find that to be true as well?
I think so, and it's almost surprising for me to keep meeting more indie authors, and you run into people at different groups, different functions. But I think in the Midwest, and again, I've been in the Midwest all my life, but we have a very high literacy rate here all throughout. Iowa is very good, but I think all the surrounding states are very strong also, and that usually means a high rate of readers, people interested in literature, all types, and I think reading reads for many years, at least in the Midwest school systems, and some very good writers have come from the Midwest. I'm not connected with the University of Iowa, but obviously the Writers Workshop at the University of Iowa has really spawned some wonderful best-selling authors, and some of the masters have been here to teach periodically, and maybe not full stint, but Vonnegut was here, Updike. I guess Vonnegut was here, and I think he taught John Updike. And then John Updike was here for a while and taught, another well-known author. So it seems to be going generation by generation, and obviously their fame has, I think, sparked interest.
Yeah.
Respect for itself.
Yeah, one of my favorite writers, he's known mostly as a short story writer, is Raymond Carver, and I know he was here as well. And there is something about we can go into why I say Iowa City, for example, Iowa more generally is sort of like a mecca for the literary.
Sure.
But there's something about the Midwest, people in the Midwest, life in the Midwest that lends itself to the type of writing that would go on in, say, a writer's workshop, and like something about, it's just, I don't know, there's something, I guess, romantic about, maybe not when you're living it, but something about that more blue collar, like we do what needs to be done, that hard scrabble kind of life that has been given such amazing life on the page by a lot of different writers. Marianne Williamson was here, and she writes kind of similar stuff, but Raymond Carver, which I don't think his stuff is necessarily set here, but it's got that same gritty kind of hard scrabble feel to it. A lot of stuff about the Great Depression and all of that stuff. So yeah, there's something there, and I haven't quite put my finger on what it is, but it's definitely real. And it's something that's not given nearly enough time, I think, by those who would prefer not to think about the Midwest at all.
I think the Midwest, actually, it's kind of character building to live here. And we do have, since don't have the great climates all year round, there are actually times of, I guess we call quiet times. and
Mm.
that might spawn reading and writing. Writing is also, as you well know, even more so than I. It's really something you have to sit down and work at and be determined to finish. And sometimes it is a work ethic kind of nature to complete a project. Even you don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but once you start it, if it gets traction, I think there's a need in Midwesterners to be able to finish the job, to see it through. Maybe
Yeah.
that might just the basic nature of the type of people that live here.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's probably true. That's, I mean, certainly an element to it. You're talking about the determination to finish a project once it's begun, and
Mm,
thinking back to journalism where you would have deadlines, I'm sure, and you
yes.
had to get stuff out. I mean, that's even mentioned in your bio, for example, so that was certainly a big part of it.
Yeah.
And I guess you can have deadlines with writing fiction, but they're much more loosely applied, and the timelines are much longer. So, do you
Hmm.
find deadlines that they were a blessing or a curse? Because I could see it going both ways.
Actually, for a lot of people who like to put things off, a deadline is a wonderful thing. It actually makes you have to know you have to be done by a certain day, certain hour, and with dailies. And now it's with social media. My goodness, it's
Mm.
probably on the hour. But with dailies, it's you have to have something done. If it's a morning paper by noon, so it can go through the proof process, go through the editors, go through production, and then be printed and be out on people's doorsteps the next morning. So that deadline is there's no forgiveness there. You miss a deadline, your story doesn't run. There's an editor probably yelling at you, and sometimes there's if you keep missing deadlines, you don't have a job anymore.
Yeah, well,
So
that would
you
certainly be motivating.
Yeah, it is motivating, and the curse part of it is it seems like not always you can get everything in that you want. In journalism, you're usually tied to space considerations and very extreme word counts, unless it's a luxury with a think piece or a Sunday feature where you might have some time to work on something. But the dailies, you do your best. They tell you what your space is. I've got room for 550 words, 600 words, and that's only roughly a 20-inch story. I'm still thinking in inches. That's on the column. Each 2.5 columns is 20 inches.
I could see it.
You just learn to kind of think in that. Yes, go ahead.
I was gonna say I could see that
Oh.
being a little bit frustrating in a way too, because when with fiction writing, as you kind of alluded to, you have all pretty much all the time and all the space.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see that being frustrating if you're working on a journalism, and there may be a time when you have to let something go out into the world before you really feel like it's ready. Like I know writers who I
Yeah.
feel like that's all they do is tinker with something. It's essentially done, but they're changing little words and
Yeah.
whatnot. And a certain amount of that is good, but at some point it's like, dude, you got to get it out there.
You got to get it. Let the baby go.
Right,
It's got to see if
exactly.
it'll breathe on its own. Yeah, I
Right.
know someone who's. I think she's been working on a story or a novel for 3 or 4 years, and I don't think she's still. I'm not sure. She's moved from Cedar Rapids, but haven't talked for a long time. But I don't think she's finished it yet. So it's again, it keeps tinkering and tinkering and tinkering. Sometime it has to be good enough. Maybe that's what beta readers are good for too. If they can get through a set of those. I have not tried that, but I probably should, just because I was so new in the fiction writing. I basically didn't know how to set up a team or set up people that could help me. So yeah, I'm still
Yeah.
learning,
Yeah, I
as
think
you well know by some of the questions I keep haranguing you with. Craig, how do you do this stuff? But anyway, yes, it's still very much of a learning curve in some of the things.
Yeah, I mean, beta readers and whatnot can be useful. Just just by nature of the business that we're in, which is the indie publishing world.
Yeah.
It's the good thing about it is that we removed the gatekeepers to a large extent, to a larger extent. But on the other hand, the flip side of that is that you don't have those gatekeepers, so you don't have somebody going through necessarily a line of editors to make sure it's right. So, beta readers are a great way to remedy that, or to take the place of that without relinquishing the control of the piece. So that's definitely something that's a positive. So retired journalist, now writes fiction. Was that a difficult transition to make?
It was. I was surprised at how long it took me to write a piece of fiction that I was happy with. But again, I started the first, well, actually, the two books were one long project. But I started when I was still working. And so for when I got in, decided to go into it and actually work on it, I was working probably 7 to 10 p.m. at night on the weekends. And that's when my kids were basically, maybe my oldest one was just starting college. The other two were in high school, or at least they were going through, that, or maybe the youngest one was getting close to being out of high school. But anyway, we were still had kids coming and going, still had, and that was exhausting. I basically came home from work and sat down at another keyboard and tried to be creative. I mean, that was draining.
Yes.
And I'm finding now that it's much, the fluidity of writing is a lot better with just being fresh and being able to sit down when you want to, and you can work through things as you're writing, instead of being hampered by a time period. You would just have to stop because you just can't do it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that would be tough to write for your job and then come home and do it as essentially your hobby too. I mean, usually when people do have a job or in a hobby, they're kind of very different things.
Yeah. Well, I was an editor basically the last 30 years, but still a lot of, I don't know, 20-25% of editing is rewriting.
Right. Yeah.
So even the staff written things, we had some very, very good writers, and just each person needed a different level of writing, proofing, whatever, and also other sources that came in that we used for stories. Usually went through me and another editor, and that entailed quite a bit of microscope research and rewrites. So yeah, you were tired after doing that for 8 to 9 hours.
Yeah. And certainly, I mean, you're still using a very similar part of your brain for the two things. So yeah, that would have been exhausting. So did you start out, when you first started writing, was it the science fiction that you started writing on?
Yes.
Or working on?
In the fiction, yes. It was the Sears books.
Okay. What drew you to that genre specifically?
To be honest with you, love affair with the Dune series. Also, been a Vonnegut fan for. I think Vonnegut was introduced to me in English Lit 101 as a freshman in college.
Yeah.
So it's Slaughterhouse-Five. I read through and I thought, this is like one of the coolest things I've ever read in my life. And then again, had very creative professors and teachers that just encouraged other. I think Stranger in Strange Land came about, during that time. Also, read Rings trilogy when I think I was in junior high. So that kind of kick-started some of the of my interest in using the imagination.
Yeah, part of me likes to think that I could see you doing your journalism career and be like, oh, now the world is so screwed up, I'm going to make a new one. And so
yeah, it's nice. And one of our author friends said, "Oh, journalism, that's where you have to have your facts correct." I was like, yeah, and it's kind of nice making up your own world and say something's happened. That's tough. That's just the way it is. Right. Or I had someone edit a very good friend who was a professional proofreader, edit the books. She was like the second one through, but she's very OCD stickler on spelling names. She kept saying, "Well, what does it mean?" And I said, "I made it up." And you can do that in science fiction, She's, I couldn't find that in the dictionary. Yes, that's right. Is all this Earth based? Yes, I made that very clear that everything on this world came from Earth, so it has a connection to Earth. That's so. It's interesting that people have their perceptions, but world building and all that it's fun to do. Sometimes you kind of can plan it out, and other times it just kind of creates itself as you go along. You think, oh, that's kind of cool. I wonder, what a character will do with this, or okay, now I've got this happening. Let's take them through a walk through it and see what happens.
Yeah, I find that a lot of writing is just simply finding a premise and then following it all the way through to its logical conclusion, or at least logical in the sense that it's logical within the world that you've created. Anyway.
Correct. Yeah, you got to keep your world. Once you set the parameters and the rules. I think this is at one of the writing workshops. Is that you really have to maintain that credibility after you've established the rules.
Right.
And there's one fantasy author that just has driven me crazy. I tried to read his first couple books, but he keeps changing the rules. People died, then they're alive. People, they're not a superhero, or they're mortal. Then all of a sudden they're a superhero because they want to be. And I'm like, dude, whatever. I mean, and he's extremely successful and this, but it just kind of broke once you kind of break that believability thing, or trust, maybe, I don't know.
I think that's right.
Just the way I was perceiving it, he almost made me I lost interest, because you keep flipping the rules and you didn't know what to expect. If someone dies, when they think, well, they're just going to come back again, so why are people grieving? They're going to come back as a ghost, as a super ghost, and inhabit someone else's body or something. But but anyway, I think that's for a lot of people. I think you have to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned one thing that was important. That's trust. I think breaking a reader's trust like that is really a dangerous game, because it's really tough to get it back.
Yeah. So and I think I don't know if that's technically what you call the fourth wall, but I think once you break that, it either works. You either have to do it. It either has to work within the piece, or I think it's can be disconcerting. So it's how good of a writer does it fit into the piece, lend itself to whatever the piece is trying to say or trying to achieve, maybe. But that's just, my take on it.
Yeah, I think, the adage of learn the rules, then break them, because then you know when to break them that will actually have the most effect. Because there's nothing wrong with, say, bending or breaking a rule in an artistic endeavor, but you need to know what you're doing when you break it.
I think there needs to be a purpose to it, and there probably is a purpose, but it's, I don't know, just the disconcerting part of it is kind of like Sheldon on the Big Bang, that it started in my brain, and it just bothered me so much. I just couldn't. I gave the 2 books away to somebody else, and this is someone. He's kind of on the George R.R. Martin schedule. He writes a huge book every 2 or 3 years, and I looked it up and said it's a 10-book series. I thought, I'm not going to be alive by the time the 10th book comes out, so I don't care anymore. Or come to the home and tell me how it ends, please. But anyway, so some things you just have to say. Is it worth the reader's time? To me, that's the journalist in me. That still, is this worth someone's time to sit down and they're giving, at least they're giving you the present of their time and their attention. And if you can capture that and keep them reading, that's very cool. But
Yeah.
that's how I think about it anyway.
Well, we as writers, I think it's important for us to know that we're not actually entitled to a reader's time. That's something that
Correct. Finding that out.
it's something we have
Yes.
to earn,
Yeah.
and it's harder, and because
That's
there are a
right.
lot of people trying to do the same thing, that we're trying to do,
Yeah.
and readers have just unlimited options. I mean, it really is. I mean, there's no
Yes.
way you could read every book, and so they have to make a decision to read yours. And
Yes.
then, which, that's kind of a grave responsibility when you think about it, especially depending on how much you think of, the relationship between people and words and language, I should say, which, for me is, I consider one of the deepest bonds of the human experience. And so that's, not to make it too lofty or anything, because both of us are right now writing genre fiction. So
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's still that kind of like almost like a social contract between a writer and a reader, and both sides have
Very much
something to
so.
say about respecting that.
Right. I had a longtime friend from high school. I hadn't seen him. He was a year behind me. I come from Central Iowa, fairly. I think there were 130 kids in my graduating class, so he was in the next class. But he heard what I was doing, and he sent me a text. First time I'd heard from him in years. He said, "That's better be good because I take my science fiction seriously." And I went,
Oh no.
okay. So is he going to come looking for me if I totally tick him off? But thankfully, he was a buddy of mine, a decent buddy of mine in school. He said he enjoyed it, and he even came in and had his book signed. So hopefully
Nice.
that's good. But it's nice to get some feedback. But sometimes you take things with a grain of salt when you have a prior relationship with someone. It's nice, but it's hard to really know if it's an honest reaction. Hopefully
Right.
it is,
Yeah.
but it's still nice to hear. But you have to kind of take that a little bit with a grain of salt.
Right. Story kind of reminds me of the Stephen King, but in Misery, my biggest fan. You're saying he hopes he doesn't come after you, but
that's about the only Stephen King movie that I've ever liked.
Yep.
Too,
Right.
Other than that nasty scene where she breaks his ankles. It's
oh
like,
boy. Yeah.
but no, that's that. Yeah.
And I've heard, I have to admit, I haven't read the book, so I don't know if this is true, but I've heard they actually toned that down from the book. Supposedly in the book, what she does is chop off his feet like with an axe, and then like cauterizes the wounds with a blowtorch. The stumps, yeah. So it could have been worse.
Eric Thurm would like that one. Whoops! I said the wrong name. Oh, we lost our feed. How come? Yeah.
And every fan we had. Oh no.
Yeah, but anyway, no, I have not read. It's just not a genre I enjoy reading, but I totally respect what he's done. And actually, he's written this is a while back, but he has a book called, I believe it's On Writing.
Oh yeah,
King, and it's an excellent book. It's just very, very good. So, he basically says if you have an idea, stick with it, and you have to make it a habit and work at it. But don't let anybody else tell you what they think of it because it's not their vision. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You see people in writers groups and you think, well, you're letting other people kind of hammer it out before you really had a chance to get it through, sift it yourself and get it, and just kind of hone it and polish it. So,
On Writing is a fabulous memoir of the craft. And if I had to recommend one book about writing to somebody, that would probably be it. I've read it more than once, and I have more than one edition of it. It's a great book.
It is good. It was given to me as a retirement present. So I had an interesting experience last year at a writing at a signing event. I was supposedly I was on a panel with four other writers, I believe. And we were all going down the table. This was an online interview also. And going down the table, everyone giving their bios. Hi, I'm so and so. I've been writing for 10 years, and I'm 40 years old. Hi, I'm so and so. Gets to me. Well, yes, I was a journalist for almost 40 years. Everyone turned and went, 40 years. And I thought, okay, from now on, it's going to be over 30 years. So it's make it sound like I'm everyone's grandpa. But
well, I mean, technically, if you wanted to narrow it down, say over 20. I mean, it is.
Yeah, yeah, a couple of decades. I was in journalism a couple of decades.
So you started out with writing science fiction. But you are beginning to explore other genres, I believe. And for example, you have a collection of short work called The Cornfield Chronicles. How did that come about?
Actually, that came about. I had the title story on the cover about the pony that tried to kill me.
Snowball, is that right?
Snowball, yeah, Snowball Pony from Hell. And just try to make a real long story short, I initially thought all of those stories were going to either be a web online column in our magazine or appear in print in the magazine. But about the time I had Snowball written, our magazine was purchased by a larger corporation. And through the transition and the move and everything, it probably took us 3 months to figure out, to get our heads out of our butts to figure out how to change from one total system. We were relying on a newspaper system to relying on our own independent thing, that I kind of lost my train of thought and desire to do it. Also, we lost the Snowball story. It was digital. And I totally lost it going from one entity to another. So I thought, well, screw that. Went to, well, that wasn't really the new bosses, but the bosses who now had a new set of management rules. And I said, well, yeah, I could still write those, but I'm writing them at home. So will I be compensated? He said, no. I went, really? I'm going to spend, how many, 29 stories and whatever. It's a significant amount of time.
Yeah.
So definitely. I thought, well, I'm just not that interested in spending, after I had the, the science fiction, the rough draft was done, and I knew how long that took me. So I thought, no, I'll just hold off, and, maybe I'll write a couple stories. And then I think after the series had been out for a year or so, for some reason, the stupid Snowball story the itch started to happen in my brain. So I thought, well, my kids would appreciate that.
Yeah.
And so, I wrote it. And then as I was writing it, all of a sudden, all these other stories started popping up. I said, well, this would make a cute story. Well, this will make a whole story. This will be. And then I also somehow accidentally found my original list of column topics, and that's pretty much the list I went off of to base. I would say most of the stories. There's a few that I ditched, and a few more that popped up as you're writing things. You think of it, and I blended some and pulled some out that turned into separate stories. So. I initially thought, well, my friends and family would enjoy this. And as I was writing it, I thought, I think there's quite a few people that would actually enjoy reading this.
Yeah.
So put it together, met the illustrator at a convention, actually at Icon 3 years ago in Cedar Rapids, and shipped him over a couple stories. And I said, you think you can make make illustrations out of this? And he said, hell yeah. And then he started coming up with all these great ideas. And then we got together and decided what would work. And to be honest with you, how much was in the budget,
right.
for an illustrator. And went from there and kind of looked at what I had for a product, and it was pretty much still in my wheelhouse. I still had a bit of name recognition in the journalism industries, especially where I came from was agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
and was able to market it, and it last year did quite well.
Good. Awesome.
So that's sorry, kind of went a long ways around to get up the
No,
hill, but
not at
that's
all.
the story behind it. But and it's it was had a very good year with it.
Good.
Had great signing, great sale, nice sales at signings. A lot of probably the most feedback I've ever had on something with people, but that's because they were in direct contact with me, usually to order a book.
Mm-hmm.
Probably 75 or 80% of the books were mail contact. And so, and I got a lot of nice notes from a few folks that were really heartwarming, and
Yeah.
makes you feel good that, okay, I'm glad I wrote it.
Yeah. No, that's always a
Yeah.
positive in this
And they were
business.
paying you for it too. So
Right.
that was even
Yeah.
better. you know, so, but, try to make it, it's 160-page book. So, you make it, don't charge an arm and a leg for it, make it reasonable. And it seems it's worked out quite well. And it's a book I'm going to probably be able to take with me for quite a few years, and to different events, and sell, and be able to market it in different venues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have the book, and
Mhm.
one thing, I mean, there.
So, what's your favorite story?
Don't
Not
put me on
being
the
him on the
spot.
spot at all. Just say Snowball.
Yeah.
That's it.
But I mean, there are a lot of things going for it, but I mean, it's sort of timeless.
Yes,
It's
it
not going
is.
to expire. You know what I mean? It's
Yes,
it's one of those
exactly.
things that's, and beyond that,
Exactly.
it's a very attractive volume. The stories are good. It's well laid out. The
And
illustrations are good.
it's a background that a lot of people in the Midwest,
Yeah.
and half of it is just being a kid.
Yep.
You don't have to farm, but it's just stories of what's going on with just a goofy kid me with my buddies, and other stuff that was happening in my life at the time. And you don't think it's funny at the time, especially with Snowball when she tried to kill me. It certainly wasn't funny.
Well, those are all the best
But
stories, though.
yeah, I think really one of the things that kicked as your question just kind of occurred to me, that at a family reunion, and I put this, I think I ended the Snowball story with this little story, yeah, little snippet. Um, a cousin asked me, he said, "Whatever happened to Snowball? She was really mean." And my daughter looks at her. She says, "You mean those are true? That story's true? I thought he was making all that up." And we both looked at her and went, "Oh, because she almost tried to kill him by running him right into a side of a barn. He shot off of her like a rocket. And he's a wrestler. He was a tough guy." And he said, "I'm not doing that again." And I'm like, "Yep." So anyway,
One writer
yeah.
that comes to mind when I'm reading it is Patrick F. McManus.
Mm,
Because you read his stuff, and he has stories about his dog Strange,
mm,
growing up in the country on a farm, and
sure.
anyway, yeah, it's funny
Yeah.
stuff.
And I have some of it's heartwarming. I mean, a couple of pets stories that, to be honest with you, I talked about how a couple of them died, and it wasn't always pleasant.
Oh yeah, yep.
It's one of the dog, again, it was both dogs. And I had a very good friend of mine said, "I really loved that till I got to the end, and now I think I hate you. You made me cry." And I said, "Well," and I
Good.
said,
That's what
"Actually,
we want to do.
made me cry a little bit when I was writing it,
Yeah.
because you lived the whole moment. It just comes back and hits you in flashbacks."
Yep. Well, as
So,
a writer, you've accomplished something, because if we can get a reader to run the gamut of emotions,
mhm.
then you've done your job. You've done it well.
Yeah, so I'm proud of it. It's neat. But people are saying, "Is there another Chronicles coming?" And I'm like, "Nope. I've got ideas for some things that are way different than Chronicles." I actually, first the other week, I woke up, thought I could do another Chronicles, but it won't be me writing it. I could
Hmm.
be, you know, the editor,
Yeah.
and ask for other people, because there's hilarious stories from hundreds of people. He could pick out a handful of decent stories and probably have another little volume. But that's something I really don't want to get into because I'm busy working on, well, one main project and a fun project, and it's the last couple of weeks I've really gotten into a nice writing rhythm. So,
Mm-hmm.
with it.
Well, yeah, and once you start establishing a bit of momentum like that, you don't want to do
Yeah,
anything that'll stop it because you don't know if or when you're going to be able to get it started again. At least that's what I found, in my own
it's hard to
writing.
stop and start,
Right.
especially with fiction.
Yeah.
Journalism is almost made for that because you get interrupted, you get phone calls, you have to stop and start, but you can just basically because there's either the stories are shorter, or you pretty much have an idea where you're going in the story, or you
Right.
just look through your notes and find out where you've been. But here is you get into the flow and you try to, sometimes you lose a thought or lose something, and it is hard uh, to to get it back.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great place to end it. ML Williams, thanks so much for joining us on the show. I really appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Well, hopefully, it's people will enjoy it.
Oh, I think they will. All right, we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks,
All right.
Craig.
Bye.
Bye.